Okay, it's really great to be here, everybody, and some of you obviously I've met before, some of you I haven't. And Sal mentioned this to me a while ago and said that the course was called Singing in Silence. Um, Very unusual, of course, for a title. And I thought, gosh, what am I gonna say about this? How am I gonna tackle this? So obviously I've been mulling it for quite some time, and a few things came up. You know, the first thing that occurs when you hear something like singing in silence is it's a kind of antithesis. They seem to be the opposite of one another, you know, and uh, strange to look at silence, perhaps. Some people might think in connection with singing, connection with music. But of course, looking at the opposite of something can always bring a richer understanding of it. And just like a dancer might want to explore the notion of stillness, or a photographer will look at, you know, darkness as well as light. Sometimes through comparison with what may appear to be its opposite, we can look at something in a new light, or find a deeper, maybe a new perspective on it. We can learn something. So then I was thinking, well, you know, what can we learn from exploring this notion of silence? And one of the first things that came up was how often we fear it as performers. A lot of what I might talk about this evening, I come from a perspective maybe of performance rather than so much singing from a really technical point of view. As Sal mentioned, I work in, well, I trained in theatre, so you're looking at dance, which was not my forte. It was quite a struggle, to be honest with you, but I studied it and still have an involvement with that. Dance and acting and singing, and what unites them all is this element of performance. And so that's probably the thing that's that I have maybe a bit more of a clear take on, and I'll be talking about that this evening. And we can have a real fear of silence in performance. You know, it's almost like it feels sometimes like it's the worst thing that can happen. We feel like silence is boring, it has to be filled. You know, it's almost like we're running away from it sometimes if we get into a particular mindset. And of course, then when we can become comfortable with it and embrace it, that opens up a whole new range, and can give us a great sense of confidence. You know, we can find really beautiful moments of silence and performance. Obviously, it's quite different in something like acting. With music, you know, even if you're silent as a singer, there's usually going to be some accompaniment. But there are moments of silence within a song. There are moments of silence within any performance. You know, it's almost like electric, that anticipation of the audience at the beginning, you know, just that moment before. Sometimes if we're in a silent situation, you know, a group of people sitting in a room together, silently waiting for the performance to begin, you know, something really magical about that. And equally, you know, something I love is the moment of silence after a performance stops and before the audience claps, you know, just that little tiny break. Just listening as that sound dies out before the audience, you know, show their appreciation. These are really magical moments if we can allow ourselves to really enjoy them and experience them, you know. And yeah, this appreciation, if we can find an appreciation of silence. Well, one thing is we might be a little bit more aware of how we fill it, you know. We might take more care with how we fill it, you know, a gentle approach. And so one of the things with silence, and having met Sal, as he mentioned, in a silent retreat, one of the things when you spend some time in silence, we have this sort of awareness of anything that disturbs it, you know, just like someone, you know, trying to quietly open a packet of crisps in a really quiet room. You know, every single little sound becomes magnified, you know, or if we're really trying to be quiet in a quiet space and you sort of accidentally knock something over, you have this like awareness, the sound is just also so magnified. And little things, you know, can become clear that we normally don't notice, including inwardly. you know. And so various questions, I think, when we spend some time you know, getting comfortable with silence. There's sometimes uncomfortable things can arise, and sometimes our own thoughts become really noticeable. That's I mean, first of all, that's absolutely brilliant. So one of the aspects that I talk about a lot relating to performance in all different areas of performing arts is noticing where our attention is when we're performing. This is absolutely crucial, and spending some time with silence can really help us to notice, because to begin with, we don't actually notice where our attention is. To begin with, a lot of the time, actually, with performance, we can just be getting through it. Sometimes there can be this inner sort of pressure, you know, the slight, like, we've just got to get through it, keep going. And again, that's like fear of stopping, the fear of, you know, what happens if we stop? What happens if it all goes to pieces? And so there can be this inner pressure. Sometimes they talk about it's like the foot's on the gas, you know, it's like your foot's on the gas, you're trying to drive the car and there's just no, you know, you're just literally, there's no, no space to sit back and enjoy the ride at all. And yeah, so allowing ourselves to take the foot off the gas, slow down, you know, spend a bit of time listening, listening maybe to what's going on. That can be really, really, really useful for us. So maybe we can start to notice, like, where's my attention? Say when we're performing, where's my attention? Now, when I talk about this, what I would normally say is there are more useful, and there's no right or wrong. There's a, you know, million different places our attention could be, but there's some that might be more useful, and there's some that might be less useful. So, for example, a more useful place for us to put our attention might be on really, you know, connecting emotionally with the meaning of the song. And a less useful place might be, you know, focusing on a mistake we just made, or what we think was a mistake, you know, or our feelings of self-consciousness. You know, those sorts of negative, we're very aware of those. We know they're not useful, but sometimes we get sort of stuck in them. And so when we look at this, it's like, okay, so if this isn't useful, what might be more useful? And the more of those that we can actually find, you know, and I think it's not just like finding one. I think it can be just, there's lots and lots of them. Those can sort of help to anchor us, I suppose, you know. But we need a certain level of stillness to be actually able to be clear, and a certain level of slowness to be actually able to be clear while all of this is going on around us. Okay, and where's my attention with that? What am I, you know, what am I actually focusing on? You know, what's the story perhaps that we want to tell? And that might be, I mean, that might be what's the story of the song, but it also might be, you know, just what's the story of this individual line? Or what is it I'm trying to convey to the audience in this moment? And those are the sorts of big questions that are really important in performance. And to me, they kind of transcend anything else, actually. Because when we're really clear on our story, that our message, what it is, we're, you know, that connection, yeah, everything else kind of falls into place. Or it doesn't matter if it doesn't. That's what I would suggest, you know. And some of my favorite singers were people who couldn't actually sing, you know. Bob Dylan, whose name I actually took, you know. This is not someone who we would cite as a technical singer, but you know, he's a Nobel Prize winner, and you know, has one of the most influential singers of the 20th century. Because we're not like ever, you know, listening to him going, oh, I'm not really sure what he did on that note. You know, it's the emotion behind it. It's the story that he's telling. That's just one example. You know, quite a few, like Lou Reed. Wow, you know, he's not really a technical singer, is he? But I mean, his music is, you know, and the meaning behind the music, it's so powerful. I was actually listening to Lou Reed recently, and I couldn't believe how, like, after not listening to it for years, I was so completely swept away by the emotion of it and the stories he was telling, you know. So so powerful. So I think, you know, when we can give ourselves space, you know, silence, take the pressure off, you know, be okay with that, be okay with, you know, taking a bit of space. then yeah, then we're more likely to be able to notice those kinds of things, those kinds of questions. Where's my attention? What's the story I'm trying to tell here, you know? So like listening, that listening inwardly, but there's also a sense of listening, you know, I mean, listening outwardly. And perhaps one, you know, one suggestion, you know, of where our you know, there's so many places our attention can be. What if we actually tried really listening to the silence? This might be something you've talked about already, but that sense of listening to the absence of the sound, is that even something we can do? What comes up, you know? And a lot of the time what comes up, you know, well, for me, is just the vastness of it, just the vastness and the space of it. And I think that ties in interestingly with the idea of resonance, because resonance is something we look at a lot as singers. And resonance is kind of how sound interacts with space, you know. You know, in a bigger space, we get more resonance. In a smaller space, we get less. And, you know, allowing ourselves to even just, it's almost like take the lid off, you know, take the lid off, just being sort of confined in this smaller space that we find ourselves in. You know, if we actually, you know, think about the silence, the space that surrounds us, and what it is we're putting into that. I mean, wow, what would happen if we tried a performance with that, with our attention there? I mean, it may, you know, again, there's no right or wrong, but it may be more useful than some of the other things, like focusing on every technical point. Because to me, there's a real trap with focusing on that kind of stuff, actually, too much, you know. And of course, we look at it and we learn it and we want to learn it, but in the moment of, and it's really important, you know, when we practice, that we can, you know, we progress along this path. But in the moment of performance, if that's where our attention is, I would suggest it's not going to be perhaps the most electrifying performance we could give, you know. In the moment of performance, we want our attention to maybe be elsewhere, and being comfortable with silence. I mean, being able to stand in front of a room full of people who are all sitting quietly watching you, and there be, you know, a few moments of silence. If you can be comfortable with that, that's going to just, you know, that's just going to transform your experience of performing, honestly, you know, and can take an awful lot of the fear out of it. So yeah, I mean, those are just some of the things that came up for me. And like I said, some of it, yeah, sort of brought round to various things that I would include in a lot of my coaching anyway. You know, maybe just a suggestion that through acquainting ourselves with silence, becoming comfortable with it, maybe exploring various ideas, you know, relating to it, we can maybe become more comfortable, yeah, sharing, and be a little bit clearer sometimes about what's actually going on inside. Because just one more note on that, where our attention is as a performer, this is so important. That is where we're directing our audience's attention to. That's what I would suggest. So I've seen this time and time again, you know, if we stand up in front of an audience, it's like a magician, you know, the magicians use misdirection. Okay, so a magician gets everybody looking so hard at their right hand that nobody sees what the left hand is doing. That's you know, I don't know anything about magic, but I know it's to do with this misdirection. You get everybody to give their attention to the wrong thing, so they're not looking where they actually should be looking. Okay, and all performance, I would suggest, works in the same way. We direct our audience's attention, and so if we stand up and our attention is really, really focused on how uncomfortable we feel and how unprepared we feel, there's a good chance people might pick up on that. If we stand up and our focus is on singing technically perfect, you know, with technical perfection, there's a good chance our audience will notice that. And if we stand up and sing with absolute embodiment and connection of the emotion of our song, there's a good chance, you know, that's where our audience's attention will be. And so that's why it's so important. It's not just, you know, it's not just because, okay, you'll give a better performance. We really are, you know, there's something that takes place in that audience performer dynamic, that once somebody is on that stage, I think we've all had that experience of somebody getting up and being really nervous, and you start to feel nervous. You know, when somebody is on that stage, we start to kind of mirror them. We, you know, very, very intelligent. We read these micro signals. We feel what they feel. It's why we like going to see plays. It's like why we like going to see theater and opera, because we go on an emotional journey with the people that we watch. And so when we stand up in front of people, we're the magician, you know, we're actually trying to direct their attention. So it's so important that we have some, you know, some awareness of that. It is a tricky thing though, because the other thing I would say is that we can only really develop that skill when we're actually performing. You can practice, you know, but the actual being in front of an audience, nothing else can really prepare you for that except being there. And so, you know, tonight you're you're going to be doing a bit of performance, and this is a wonderful opportunity. Any performance is a great opportunity.